This is the Solid Signal podcast for the week of August 10th, 2020. So I find myself in a little bit of a pickle this week because here at the Solid Signal podcast, we have a precisely zero budget for licensing music, and yet I desperately would love to play the first couple of seconds from the first song on the Beatles' 1967 album, which I think if I say more than that, they'll probably charge me a licensing fee. But if you know what I'm talking about, let's just say that I'm talking about a time, in this case, 21 years ago. And I think you might have that song going through your head at this point. If you don't, please forgive me for wasting your time, but it's just my way of trying to have a little fun without actually spending a ton of money. I find myself this last week or so really diving deep into 1990s, especially late 1990s sitcoms. This was a time for NBC when it seemed as if they could do no wrong. Yes, they had this kind of obsession at the time, I remember, with a couple of actors like Breckin Meyer and Ben Silverman, and kept trying to put them in shows that really people didn't want to watch. But really, the 1990s for sitcoms belonged to NBC. Not just Friends and Seinfeld and Cheers and to some extent Night Court, but it certainly seemed like NBC could do no wrong back then. And a lot of the shows that they had on back then, even stuff that we don't tend to think about today, ends up being extremely palatable television. The kind of television that I think that you probably want to be watching right now. You see, if you're like me, here we are in August of 2020, and the last thing that you want to be watching is a movie about some sort of apocalyptic event that tears the world apart. You might feel like you have to watch some documentary content that relates to things going on today, and if that's the kind of thing you enjoy, hey, more power to you. But I have to say that despite my attempts to better myself, I'm much more interested these days in watching something pleasantly mindless, something that's going to distract me from what's going on today and make me not have to worry about, well, hey, what's going on? You know, when was this TV show shot before April? Was it shot after April? Are they being responsible? All I want to do is sit back and watch some television, and I find that the sitcoms of NBC in the 90s are just what let me do that. If you take a look at NBC's primetime schedule for 1997 and 1998, for example, you find shows like Just Shoot Me and Suddenly Susan and News Radio that coexisted alongside Friends, and they were still running reruns of Seinfeld by that time. And these are really very watchable shows. News Radio had a really, really wicked sense of humor. You get to see a guy named Joe Rogan before he became a controversial podcast host and was just kind of a, comic actor. And if you watch that show, by the way, you will also see the excellent Phil Hartman in this show and doing his absolute best work. It's good stuff, it's watchable, and it's a lot of fun. Just Shoot Me is a show that I picked up. It's finally on Hulu after many, many years. And I was really not aware that this show ran for 7 seasons because it wasn't treated very well by NBC. It never found a permanent time slot, really, and it just bounced around from place to place. And I should probably point out that other networks were doing good work too. I mean, ABC had Home Improvement, which was a big hit for them in those days. And they also had Grace Under Fire. They had Dharma and Greg. The UPN, which is not even a network anymore, had Moesha, which is remembered fondly by a lot of people. The king of all of them at that time was Mad About You, which I've written about in a couple of other blogs. All in all, when you watch this stuff, you get a very different feeling. This was episodic television. We tend to attack shows like Friends a lot for not having a lot of relationship to reality. We say that Friends was out of touch, that it wasn't representative of the cultural diversity of the time, that these people could have never lived in this size of apartment, whatever. But Friends is hardly alone in that kind of dissociation from reality. But you have to remember at that time, in the 1990s, that is what we wanted. And I have to kind of wonder if that's exactly what we want today, too. If maybe it just makes sense to sit back and enjoy a kind of an alternate universe where things are just kind of nice and sunny, and as long as nobody is offended and as long as we're being kind of appropriate in the way that we treat people, that it's just kind of okay. I could take the 1990s television genre in general to task for not holding up to today's norms of cultural diversity and sensitivity. And regardless of where you sit on that particular question, you're probably going to agree that it's true. You know, there were a lot of jokes back then that really wouldn't make sense today. And that's perfectly okay. We should be able to look back at our past and say, okay, we've changed, we've evolved, and without embracing some of these cultural problems, without embracing some of that stereotypical behavior, at least be able to enjoy what's going on within its relatively narrow framework. I would like to think that the 1990s are not so far removed is what I'm trying to say, that we couldn't be accessible that way at all. I guess what I'm trying to say is no, I don't want to hold up 1990s television to say it's exactly what we should be doing today. But on the other hand, it kind of feels comfortable and right and okay in a lot of ways. Ignoring a lot of the problems. Maybe we can make time in our lives for a separate discussion of those problems and understanding of those problems. But isn't it nice every so often to just reach back to something that feels a little comfortable? In the words of a famous sitcom, which was still airing in the early 90s, sometimes you got to go where everybody knows your name. And when you watch 1990s television, that can be how you feel. It's just kind of TV comfort food for a lot of folks. And if you're one of them, then don't feel bad about that. Embrace it, because these days we all have to do whatever makes us happy as long as it's not hurting somebody else. There's enough hardship in the world, and I guarantee you just going back and watching a little comfort food TV is not going to be the most hurtful thing that could happen to you. Anyway, that's about it for the podcast this week. I thank you for listening. Go ahead and like and subscribe. Especially, I really want to try to drive up some Spotify viewers, get those metrics going. If you're a Spotify listener, you pay for that anyway, why not subscribe to the Solid Signal podcast? Listen to it that way. That way you can get it in your car, you can get it on your phone, and it's a great way to listen. Podcasts are never really that long. They're always kind of a little bit bizarre, off the deep end. I try to keep them kind of interesting for you. I hope you agree. And, of course, do shop at solidsignal.com, because they're the ones who keep the lights on here on this podcast, and I sure do appreciate it. That's all for me for this week. Talk to you again soon.